Gus Fring was always in control, careful, calculated and untouchable. For years he had built an empire built on precision. He rarely made mistakes. But all it took was that one mistake and everything changed. And here's why. Gus Fring didn't just build a drug empire, he perfected it. Hidden in plain sight, his operation ran with absolute precision. Every more controlled, every more calculated. At the centre of it all was Walter White. At first, Gus Fring thought he could manage Walter. He thought he could work with him because he was an excellent chemist and had a talent that only a drug dealer could love. However, that talent was beginning to spiral as his ego was beginning to grow and Walter became unpredictable. As somebody who is as smart and as well controlled and as well planned as Gus Fring is, that one difference was going to change everything. The problem for Gus Fring was never his meticulous planning and structure. It was Walter White. Walter White was becoming to be the disruptor as he became unpredictable and Gus didn't know what to do. He decided to make a decision that would change everything. He decided to underestimate Walt's abilities, and even though he tried to get him killed, he didn't think of the repercussions, as Walt would bite back in a way that Gus never expected. And he walked into a trap that blew half of his face off, and in that moment, he didn't just die. He lost his empire, he lost everything that he'd put his blood, sweat and tears in, and Walt's empire was starting to grow. This is where the main problem really started. Gus Fring's death led to a vacuum that only Walter White was too eager and too stupid to take up. His ego, his passion, his power was all starting to get bigger and bigger, all for the greed of wealth and chasing the thrill. Walter literally went from being a chemist in this moment to being an empire. He was unstoppable and dragged everybody down into his mud. But the cost was immediate. Jesse was already feeling depression, guilt, and the fear of Walter White and his ego was starting to take shape. The delusionment of everything's going to be alright is what kept him going. But inside he was struggling, and with Walt now taking more power, this became like an abusive relationship. And speaking of abusive relationships, he wasn't the only one that struggled during these times, as Skylar was also downtrodden by Walt's antics, as Walt now became uncontrollable and untouchable and was making more money than they knew what to do with. Skylar hated being in that position of helping him money launder and helping to run the car wash to make it look like they were making lots and lots of money, whereas in reality, Walt was using money laundering via his car wash to make himself richer and to make his empire grow. Skylar felt like she was in the same boat as Jesse in this abusive sort of relationship that she no longer wanted to be a part of, but kept on going because of the fear of Walt and what he was capable of. But those two weren't the only two impacted by Heisenberg's rise, as Mike was a former staff member of Gus Fring and worked closely alongside him to put the plans in place to build a bigger empire for Gus. However, when Gus was took out by Walter and his meticulous planning, it left Mike unknown of the future, because he knew he could work with Walt and take the empire and help him build an empire. But the problem wasn't the empire and the structure, because that was all put in place by Gus. He knew he could put that into place. The problem was Walt's ego, and Walt's power was starting to grow. Mike could see it on the wall that even though he could make profit, he knew that he wouldn't have the same levels of protection that Gus allowed him to have and kept them well undercover. Whereas what Walt was doing was far more dangerous. And this was just the catalyst for everything going wrong. If you enjoy breaking down the exact moments where franchises, series has changed for either the better, for the worse, then don't forget to subscribe, as this is Everything Changed, and you want to be alerted to our next episode. Gus Fring's death led to a void that only Walter White could fill. Heisenberg's rise to power came at a cost. 3 of the people closest to him would suffer, Mike, Jesse, and Skylar began to feel the wrath of being alongside Heisenberg. This recklessness, this dangerous intent from Walter would eventually lead to his downfall. This is the moment that changed everything.